Alex Dean, and The Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha. You've picked out the story that makes the front page of the Mirror and a double-page spread in the middle. I can only show them to you separately. So we've got death, rather ominously there,
of our schools.
So what is their point here?
So 500 heads have written into the Prime Minister asking her to think again about school cuts. And as the Institute for Fiscal Studies has shown, schools are facing average real per pupil cuts in funding of 7%. And some schools are facing much more than that, up to 20%. In some of those schools are in the poorest areas. So we've seen lots of stories come out in recent months about how schools are struggling to cope with these cuts. They're considering laying off staff. On a very extreme level. Some head teachers have said, well, this might leave us only opening our schools 4 days a week. And it's a really tough context. So lots of other services around schools have been cut back that local government runs, things like children's social services, education psychology. So schools are having to pick up more, and they're facing real per pupil cuts. And schools, I think, are quite fairly saying, well, we just can't deliver education to the same standard if you expect us to find these savings.
What Sonia doesn't tell you is that this is about a consultation rather than about a policy that's been announced. And it suits some people, dare I say, even about our teachers. Both my parents were teachers. The teachers do fantastic work. But there is a vested interest at play here. And people always want more money into the system.
Vested interest in the interests of our children?
And, what's enough? What's enough? If it saves one child or helps one person, what's enough?
I think maintaining school budgets as where they are in real per pupil terms would go a long way.
School budgets are still going up. And the point about the
not on a per pupil real basis.
Don't shout at me, I'm sitting right here. This conversation is what you do with the money that you have, and it's going from 40 billion to 42 billion in the school budget. The spending is going up. And the consultation is about how best you spend the money that we have. And of course, we won't have money to spend on our schools unless we have a strong economy. And on that, I know we agree, because Corbyn would ruin our economy. And whilst I just think he'd be a bad Prime Minister, most pundits on the left really hate him. So presumably that's at least a point you can agree with.
What I would say is the government doesn't need to be cutting income tax, cutting corporation tax by billions of pounds a year while making schools face these cuts to budgets. It just doesn't make sense.
Of course it does, because you can cut taxes and stimulate an economy.
Yeah, but how does that help kids?
Because you get more money. That's the point about
stimulating an economy. There's no evidence that cutting corporation tax increases growth. Absolutely not at all.
To be revisited.
OK, another day we'll do that argument, shall we? Because we have got other stories we want to squeeze in. I think there's a couple on this front, this double-page spread, if we can manage it. Let's talk about Trump first of all, shall we?
Donald Trump has reversed his position on NAFTA, at least to say that in response to communication from Mexico and Canada, he is prepared to revisit his decision. It's interesting that the president is willing to do this sort of thing. And on one view, you might look at this sort of behaviour and say, look at how inconsistent somebody is. And another view is, of course, well, the ability to admit that you were wrong on something or to think again is a good quality, especially if, in fact, you were wrong. And the other comparison, of course, when our Prime Minister was over, was with NATO, which he'd called obsolete before, and after a good talking to from Theresa May, emerged saying, actually, it was really good and it was they were going to continue.
OK, so do voters respect people when they think, well, it's fair enough, he's looked at the facts and changed his mind? They don't mind that, do they?
I mean, I'm glad he's making some of these U-turns, don't get me wrong, but I think when you stand on a platform, you've had a chance to look at those facts before you get elected to government, and then you sort of say, well, now I've seen the facts and I'm doing a complete about turn. I think that's what a lot of people who voted for Trump were voting against politicians chopping and changing.
But if he said he wasn't going to build a wall or something, that would be the thing. But this, I don't know.
OK, and I'm going to whiz you on because we've only got a couple of minutes and we want to have a quick nod to the French election.
Le Pen is narrowing the polls significantly.
I'm not sure it's significant. She's gone up by 2 points. Yeah. There's still a good 20-point, almost 20-point gap between Macron and Le Pen.
Yeah.
Which was what I was about to say.
Oh, OK. Well, you did that very quickly. Well done, both of you. OK, let's whiz on. You haven't given me a chance to find the next story. But it's about Boris Johnson, and there's been a lot of talk today about mugwumps, a word which some of us
it's an actual
know what
word.
It meant.
It is a word, but of course it yields the tantalising question, what else could you have been called if Boris hadn't opted for mugwump and had in fact opted for, as that's a story about tiny dogs that terrify postmen.
Oh,
so that's all right. That's a good story too.
That's a story. There we go.
800 shy dog, so terrifying for postmen that they don't deliver there anymore. Chihuahua, as the postmen call it.
Fantastic. But there is the right
Yeah,
page.
I think my favourite out of these is Throttlebottom, an innocuously inept and futile person in public office.
I like Snollygoster, an unprincipled politician.
But we've got 45 seconds to reflect on what impact it has throwing insults around. Do you think that it's
not the
sensible?
They're not words that
electioneering?
they're not words that I would choose to use myself. But on the other hand, it keeps the point about Jeremy Corbyn on the front of the page, and everyone's been talking about it all day. You know, not just mugwumps, but Jeremy Corbyn being a mugwump. So if your aim is to keep Corbyn in the public consciousness front and centre in this election, then it works.
Does it make Corbyn look like a more principled politician?
Well, I don't know. I think the Conservatives do need to be careful because, I mean, no one's saying that Theresa May isn't going to win this election, but by going so personal and so hard on Jeremy Corbyn, if voters don't believe that Jeremy Corbyn is even in with the tiniest of chance, will that mean that Conservative voters stay home?
OK. Sonia and Alex, thank you for a spirited paper review. We enjoyed having you. Thanks very much indeed.
As a warm day ends in Africa,